I'm Paul Clolery. I'm editor-in-chief of the Nonprofit Times, the leading business publication of the nonprofit sector. We've been around since 1987. We do the print and digital editions of the Nonprofit Times every month. We have 5 e-letters. We do these executive sessions, and we have the largest salary and benefits report in the country. So check us out at thenonprofittimes.com. We're doing these executive sessions with our friends at TechSoup, which equips nonprofit change makers with transformational technologies and solutions and skills. It helps improve life globally. We couldn't do this without the TechSoup guys. In fact, they were my first call when we were going to relaunch this. And our guest today is H.R. Taylor. He's the new executive president and CEO of the Association of Fundraising Professionals, just recently over from the BBB Wise Giving Alliance. Art, welcome to the executive session.
Paul, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Hey, 23 years of the Wise Giving Alliance. Now you're coming over here. And we know that we saw the announcement that Bennett Weiner had gotten promoted to the head of the BBB Wise Giving Alliance. So we figured maybe you had died or some hit your head or something. We're waiting for the other shoe to drop, and there it was. So what brought you from the BBB over to the Association of Fundraising Professionals?
Well, that's a good question because, you do something for almost 24 years and, you don't just leave on a whim. So it did take a little bit of thought, but I'll say it's been kind of twofold, Paul. One is just my respect for the work that we've done over the years at the Wise Giving Alliance. We've taken the organization a long way in that time, and it is clearly respected as perhaps the most rigorous charity monitoring organization out there.
No doubt.
Many innovative things that you don't generally see in our space. And so, I felt like we've done a lot of good work, and I wanted to at least be alive to see the next iteration of it and maybe to assist from the outside if necessary. And I didn't also want to leave too late, right? But you don't just do that. Something has to come along that inspires you enough to actually move. And I've been doing a lot of work, Paul, you may have known over the last few years with this Generosity Commission that concluded its work a few months ago. And this idea that we've lost so many donors over the last 20 plus years really concerns me. And as someone who spent most of my life working in the nonprofit sector, I feel like it's a threat. And when the opportunity came along to consider a job working with the Association of Fundraising Professionals and the many people there who go after donor dollars to put it to good use and who connect people with giving opportunities, I felt like maybe this was a way for me to contribute to changing that trajectory of declining donors by helping fundraisers do their jobs better and perhaps more ethically.
And it's funny you should say that because I think that you're walking into an organization that is ripe for change. I mean, you've been. I assume your acclimation curve is going to be very quick. Notice I didn't say learning curve. I said acclimation because you've been around fundraising for so long. You're an association executive. But AFP has had some issues with regard to chapters, particularly looking at the Toronto chapter, the largest chapter outside the United States, and the issues up there, and chapters in general across the country. Give us your 1, 2, 3 on walking through the door and what you're seeing and how you're going to make some changes.
Well, I'm going to learn a lot. You said acclimation, but there's still some learning that I have to do about the association, its relationship with chapters, and what we can do to actually make the member experience better and more effective for each person who happens to join the association. We also want to see more people join our community, and we have to make the case for why they should participate and come up with products, services, ways for them to be educated and link with one another. And chapters really are a key element to making sure that the member experience is strong. And we want to do everything we can to support chapters and their leaders so that the events, the relationships, the communities that they're building locally can lead to the kind of results that they expect and we want.
Or you know that the lifetime of a fundraising executive in a nonprofit is somewhere in the 18 to 24 month neighborhood. Given everything that we're seeing in Washington, we're seeing a lot of fundraisers talking about burnout in the system. Are you expecting that with all the changes that are coming down the pike from Washington and other places, that we're going to see a quicker turnover in fundraisers, and what impact might that have on the sector?
I hope not, Paul. I believe that, we have to do everything we can now to change that. But in our sector in general, I think people are burned out and anxious and concerned about the many policy changes that we're seeing in the government and how it's affecting our society more broadly. But I think one of the challenges fundraisers have that I want to try to address, and it's kind of a hypothesis of mine, is that many boards of directors don't necessarily understand what good fundraising is. And I think they tend to focus on how much money came in the door compared to what a goal or a campaign was. And I just feel that if we could get board members in particular to better understand that great fundraising is as much about the process that fundraisers use to raise funds as much as it is the money that comes in the door, then we have a chance of getting fundraisers to have more faith that their processes will yield the results and that they'll feel less stress from boards who obviously want to see the money come in the door, but may not be focusing on the metrics and the activities that it really takes to do great fundraising. And I want to see what we can do to educate boards and even some executive teams too. The other thing, Paul, is that while we have 1.4, 1.5, 1.6 billion organizations, depending on how you measure it. We, according to the Bureau of Labor Statistics, and I don't know where they get these numbers from, but there's about 125,000 people in the country who call themselves fundraisers. So obviously we have a huge shortage. So some of the reason might be about burnout, but the other is we know that organizations can't find qualified people to do fundraising. And so we've got to do a lot more work, I think, to help bring new people into fundraising as a profession and help train them up so that they can do the work well and ethically.
One of the, on two fronts of things that you just mentioned, boards and bringing more people in, is it a matter of money, for example? In some cases, in the for-profit world, the chief of sales makes more than the CEO. Do we need to relook at how fundraisers are compensated to get them in the door and keep them in their positions, showing that a longer-term relationship with a nonprofit, any nonprofit that they happen to work for, will be beneficial to both the organization because of the continuity, and to them because they'll be making more money?
Yeah, well, I think in general, we have to look differently at how we source and resource the fundraising effort. And, I'm going to be probably blamed for some of the challenges that organizations have had over the years spending money on fundraising. At the Wise Giving Alliance, we had a ratio that said that only you should spend no more than 35 cents to raise a dollar. And while we didn't see many organizations struggling to meet that, if you look at what's happening in the environment now, compared to what it was like when I started with the Wise Giving Alliance back in 2001, clearly there's a number of things happening that make looking at that specific number as a metric somewhat challenging. And I want to go back to what I just said. We need to evaluate fundraising performance way differently than looking at a particular ratio. And if that means organizations have to spend more money at different points in their evolution in order to achieve the objectives, then they should. Now, I'm not suggesting that an organization should spend a preponderance of its money on fundraising. No one wants to see that. But I think there should be a lot more flexibility around how organizations spend their resources to bring in new money. And if you consider too, Paul, that many of the people who do fundraising today are focusing on major gifts. No one's spending time on trying to find money at the lower end or supporting the needs of the average everyday donor. And it's the average everyday donor, as you know, that gives organizations the independence they need in order to do their work. And so, but how many organizations are actually spending money on direct response and going after everyday donors? I would suggest that it's way different now than it was in the past. And then there's this final point that there's probably some shifts going on in our culture at the everyday donor level. You know, if you are a young person who went to college over the last 20 years, you probably still have massive amounts of student loan debt, and you're trying to pay that back. You have kids who need daycare services, and you are trying to just make it work financially in your household. You're probably thinking that someone should be giving you support rather than you should be supporting an organization. And that's not to say people aren't generous. They are. But they also recognize that maybe a family member needs help and I can give them a little bit of money rather than giving to an institution. So we have all of this going on that might make it more critical that organizations actually spend a little bit more, take a little bit more risk in going after donations in places where they didn't consider before. And so we have to take a look at it in a different way. And I think even organizations like mine, the current organization I'm with, the Wise Giving Alliance, is actually looking at that. What different things can we do to focus on what we really should be measuring from an accountability standpoint and not burdening organizations with ratios that don't make a whole lot of sense?
See, there lies the problem with talking to you. You've now said 6 or 7 things that I want to jump on.
Go for it.
You said 2 important words there that the head of AFP hasn't said in, I don't know, since I've been doing this gig, and that's almost 30 years, direct response.
Yeah.
It was almost a bad phrase when you were talking to fundraisers at AFP. Direct response was, we don't do direct mail. We don't do direct response. How are you going to change that attitude within the structure of AFP and to its members that direct response, direct mail is a good thing?
Well, direct response is a skill, just like going after major gifts. And if you do it well, you can generate a predictable amount of return. And so, yeah, I think that AFP and other organizations that are supporting fundraisers should be considering that. Colleges and universities use direct response to reach alumni, even telethons, right? So there are different ways of engaging direct response. And if you look at an organization that is maximizing all of its fundraising channels, you would want to have direct response as an element of that, generally speaking. So yes, we should be training up people to do great direct response, to do the science and the art behind it, to make sure that that is functional in our society. And I know that people will look at direct mail, for instance, and say, well, the costs are going up. Yes, they are. But can you think of a way in which you can reach people with a request for funding that they're almost guaranteed to at least look at, even if they don't support you? I can't. Email is not quite the same, although that's great direct response work too, and it's very cheap. But you're going to get the letter in your mailbox. Chances are you're going to open it.
Uh-huh.
And you might decide as a result of opening it that you want to give it. So, and it has to be done smartly and with science and testing and trying to keep the cost as reasonable as possible. But it can be a good way for organizations to generate and supplement what they're doing from a fundraising standpoint. And the other thing, as you know, Paul, is that when you get a person at a lower end, it's an opportunity to grow them over time and to create opportunities for larger gifts later on.
So many organizations are abandoning the lower donors because they think it's too expensive to get them. But you're absolutely right. It's part of the donor journey. But you were also talking about changing some of the philosophy, changing some of the methods. How important are influencers going to be in the fundraising of the future?
This is kind of an interesting point too, because when we were working with the Generosity Commission, I was co-chair of the Policy and Government Affairs Task Force. And we were trying to think of what new policies could we implement to get people incentivized to give. And we came up with some of the standard ones. There are some things around taxes, of course. There are always that. Tax credits, whether or tax deductions, making these charitable deduction ubiquitous for every taxpayer. But the more we thought about it, the more we realized that there's probably more going on in our culture. And what we probably need are people like the LeBron Jameses and the Taylor Swifts and others to try to make giving at the everyday level normalized. Now, I realize that there are some challenges associated with that. People will look at them and say, well, they have millions and millions of dollars. Of course, it's easy for them to give. But we need people out there who are willing to stand up and say, making a gift is as American as eating an apple pie. It not only does good for your society, especially when aggregated with the gifts of others, but it also makes you feel good. It gives you agency over what's happening in your community or a particular cause that you care about. And we have to help people appreciate through these influencers, that no gift is too small. Every gift matters.
I was shocked that last April, St. Jude's had 300 influencers on our campus to try to help them understand what the organization does. And I said to one of the officials there, I said, well, these are all kids. And they said, we don't care. We'll give them a T-shirt. Let them walk down the block with a St. Jude's T-shirt on. That's exposure. And the other one thing that surprised me was gaming, how important that has become to the fundraising process. Games for Change, for example, is helping organizations rake in millions of dollars, even in the $10,000 and $20,000 spigot. Okay, this organization's going to do a game-a-thon, but they're only going to raise $25,000. But you're going to, when you see it on a national level and aggregated, my God, that's a lot of money being raised.
Sure. And, we used to do a lot of events, right? Event-based fundraising. And we knew those events wouldn't necessarily generate a lot of money, although smart organizations get all the money raised before the event. And then you come into the event and you announce this big number that you raised that night. Mm-hmm. But the events are really designed, as you know, for two purposes. One is to get money, but secondly is to bring in new people into the cause in a way that's interesting to them and a way that they might then say, wow, I've learned something today about a particular cause. Let me see what I can do. I didn't know that this was the same challenge that I've experienced. It also inspires people who are part of the organization and who are volunteering for it when they can come and hear the stories of people who have been helped or benefited from the organization in a way that's visceral and meaningful for them.
Okay, so as you embark on your new position, what's keeping you up at night?
That's a great question. I sleep pretty good at night, but when I'm up, I'm up.
It's just the pills,
right? No, I feel that there's a lot to be concerned about, but I have maybe a slight difference in my orientation that many people have. Some years ago, I was connected to an organization called the Institute for the Future. And they have many tools and techniques and research that they do to help us come to terms with what may be happening over the next decade. And so what I try to do is prepare myself for what may come. And when I see things happening in the environment, I try to sort of connect the dots and see how they align with signals and shifts that are going on, things that I'm already familiar with, things that I've already thought about, and then try to be innovative so that we don't have to worry. We can kind of prepare ourselves. Doesn't always work. But even now, Paul, what's going on in our environment, while we couldn't have anticipated the level of what we're seeing, it's not out of the realm of, it wasn't out of the realm of possibility that we would see a movement toward order in our society as opposed to freedom. And I think that's what we're feeling right now. A shift away from freedoms that people have enjoyed, freedoms to give where you want, freedoms to operate a nonprofit without anyone questioning your mission, freedom to support the kinds of issues that you really deem are important. These are things that we always expected. And now what we're seeing is a shift maybe to order, which is all about in some ways restricting those freedoms. But our country always swings back and forth. Maybe we're going to swing faster back and forth than we had in the past. But as long as the levers of our pendulum continue to hold, and those are the courts and our military and our democratic institutions, I think we're going to be okay. And I'm an optimist, I know, and a lot of people can't get where I am right now. But as I look down the road, our society is changing, and I don't see how it's going to change back to where it was 30, 40 years ago. We continue to be a more diverse society. Diversity is going to mean that we're going to have people who have different points of view, and those points of view aren't going to be denied. And so we're going to have to learn to communicate across difference and to find out where we have common ground. You can't force that on people. These are things that people have to do naturally and over time, we'll see, I think, that we'll have a stronger and better democracy as a result.
There's got to be some place where there's a common bond. And that I've been an EMS guy for about 40 years now. One of my best friends and one of my partners is a MAGA guy. And I love the guy like he's a brother. And we've got into buildings that other people are running out of together. But we've got a common ground.
Yeah.
We love what we do. We've got some, and we can actually agree on a lot of things. So how do we get the country, how do nonprofits mobilize and get the country talking to each other again? We don't have to always agree, but how do fundraisers help move the country back to speaking to each other again?
Yeah. Well, our fundraisers are sort of the first line of communication in many organizations. They're the people who are going out and making contacts, either directly or through things that they write or communicate in different forms. And they have to always be obviously energized and equipped to deal with whatever comes in their way. And so I think in some ways, fundraisers may be, our first line of support in that way. But, inside of our organizations too, Paul, I think there are great opportunities. If you're in a national organization in particular, you know that you have people in your organization of every walk of life. These are people who have come together to be a part of your organization because of a particular mission. But they may see the world very differently, and that's okay. And so I think it's important organizationally for us in the nonprofit sector to show what can happen when you can bring people together around a purpose. And one of the things we can really offer people in our sector is a purpose. We do this for this reason. We want to see our society different in a certain way that we have ascribed to a mission. And if you want to be a part of this, it doesn't matter where you come from. We are welcoming you. And then you sort of, you set some values around that for how we communicate, how we engage each other, starting with things like respect and mutual support and appreciation, putting the mission above self in some cases. I think those are the kinds of things that we can demonstrate in our sector that will help build bridges and help us communicate and connect across difference ideologically.
All right, Art, thank you so very much. That's H.R. Taylor, the new president and CEO of the Association of Fundraising Professionals. We'll see you in Seattle, I'm assuming, in a couple of weeks. Thanks. I'm Paul Clolery. I'm the editor-in-chief of the Nonprofit Times. please go to thenonprofittimes.com, take a look at what we've got up on breaking news and everything else that we've got up there. And thanks to our friends at TechSoup for handling the technology for these executive sessions. Art, thanks so very much.
Thank you, Paul. See you in Seattle.
See you in Seattle.